Well, good morning. Our second lesson, this should come as no surprise, is actually Psalm 23. Let us listen to the word. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul and leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I was going to tell you, please be seated, but you beat me to it. First of all, a little bit of an apology. Here I am proclaiming the word from the pulpit. I do not have a coat and tie on. It's summer in San Antonio, and I just thought, actually, as I went through the debate this morning even, I think that's why I've elected to be, this is a little cryptic, but I think it's why I've elected to be cremated, is that I don't want to wear a coat and tie to my own funeral. You have witnessed a small miracle. I don't know if I recited that perfectly or not, but some of you probably think, well, there's Bob. He's just up there reciting a Bible verse that he learned when he was 9 years old. Actually, no. My habit has been very bad about memorization my entire life. So earlier this year, at age 64, I read a wonderful little book entitled The Lord is My Shepherd by Robert Morgan. It was a celebration of Psalm 23, as he's a writer, pastor, family man who'd lived on a few acres out east, and on that acreage had a small herd of sheep to accent the pasture. His experiences and anecdotes and others helped me through chapter by chapter, both to memorize and appreciate those verses. When I was looking ahead to see what the lectionary text had in store, Psalm 23 was one of them. I couldn't resist. And like I said, I don't memorize. I also don't tell jokes. So there was this lady who was in a hospital, and she had very, very serious surgery ahead of her. She was worried. She prayed to God. The Lord spoke to her heart. He said, "Don't worry about anything. You have another 40 years of living ahead of you." The surgery was a success. She was just elated. She was so thrilled, she thought, I'm going to stay in the hospital a little bit longer. She had a facelift, a tummy tuck, liposuction. She just really had the works done. She got out of the hospital. A couple of weeks later, she's walking across the street. Bam! She gets hit by a bus. She is killed dead. She arrives in heaven, and there she was met by the Lord. And she thought, Lord, I have to ask, you told me I had another 40 years. The Lord said, I didn't recognize you. Now that joke and this next message may be of very little spiritual value, but we'll see. I've come to the conclusion that I am a bundle of habits. I have good ones and bad ones. Some of my bad ones I've worked at and they've become a little better. I also have some bad habits that are doing quite fine, and they have no risk of little danger of changing anytime soon. So as the pandemic started, I had very high awareness of this concept of the habits of Bob. Overnight, everything changed and it was messing with my habits. I was accustomed to wandering through South Texas and kind of going wherever I wanted to with my business. We were told to quarantine at home. It changed from don't leave home without it to don't leave home. Don't leave, don't shake, don't eat out, don't hug, keep your distance, stay at home. Watch the COVID reports and statistics every day. Don't go on vacation. Watch the stock market tumble. Get mad at people who buy too much toilet paper. Get mad at people who have the boldness to get together with their family. Get mad because stores aren't open and if they are, everybody in there is a little bit different. Oh, and take care of yourself and try to stay well. There's something out there trying to get you. These became our new habits. This change was abrupt and brutal. If our habit was to go to church, well, it's closed. So now our habit is not to go to church. That time is filled with other activities. Now, those weren't all necessarily bad. Some families did a lot more things together. There was a lot of virtual Zooming and getting together with friends and family members. Our pets were big beneficiaries. I'm willing to bet more dogs got walked more miles than ever before. All right, I'm going to try this again. So there's this older guy, about my age, walking through his neighborhood. He saw this young group of boys, kind of in a circle. In the center was this little dog, cute little dog, brown and white stripe, little white tip on its tail. One kid in the group was kind of like the leader of the gang. So he explained to the rest of the kids who were quite interested in this little dog. The little dog, they just found it. There was no owner. Everybody wanted the little dog. So this kid, he came up with this idea. They were going to have a little contest. Whoever could tell the biggest lie could get the dog. So this guy, kind of like me, you know, he's there, he's thinking, this is a teaching moment. So he kind of stepped in and he explained to the kids, lying is wrong. We must be truthful. That when he and his friends were the age of these little boys, they didn't tell lies. They were very virtuous. They helped other people. The little boy hung his head remorsefully. He said, well, mister, you win. He looked at his friend and said, give him the dog. During the pandemic, a lot of lies seemed to get the prize. When you can't do what you're used to doing, it's disorienting, a little confusing to our system, and definitely irritating. But for some, it becomes something else. It's depressing. It's kind of like burnout. Being creatures of habit makes us fill with new habits. The new habit can be to search for meaning and something to fill an emptiness inside. But this can be a real crapshoot as to whether this new habit is good or not so good. So in one way or another, I was going to develop new habits to take place of some that I no longer could engage in. Now, this idea of creating new habits was actually something I'd come up with a few years back. I'd received an email from a publisher called Guideposts that they were offering a Bible organized to be read day by day from January 1st to January 31st completely. Read the whole book in a year. This broke down to reading about 5 pages a day. And a quirky thing about it was that it was in chronological order, which kind of piqued my interest as well. Because I had the habit of being a horrible, uncommitted reader, I ordered the option of large type. This was an enormous book. But I was thinking, even I can read 5 pages a day. I determined that I could carve out a 30-minute slot each morning but I'd need to set my alarm 30 minutes earlier. That was a bummer. But I was building a new habit. I wanted to see what effect, if any, reading the Bible would have on me. To fill the 30 minutes, I added a couple of devotional type readings. And if I knew I was traveling out of town, I'd take pictures of my reading that day. It'd be in my phone or on the pad, so wherever I was, rather than carrying this gigantic Bible around, I would make sure that I read it every day. I did not miss a reading. I usually read it on the day for that entire year. I did it. That was 2018. Then in 2019, I didn't know what to do, so I read it again. Now, the crazy thing in 2019, and I guess maybe this gets back to whatever age I said I was earlier, whatever I read that day in 2019, it was like it's brand new, like I'd never read that before. But really, exactly 1 year ago that day, I'd read that same passage. So that second year made it more interesting. Had a couple of friends of mine who also bought the book. And so we're both, all of us were kind of reading through it at the same time. That made it more interesting. And I helped Guidepost sell a couple more Bibles. So then at the beginning of 2020, I thought, well, what next? So I started again, round 3, and discovered that each day I read, I'd forgotten what I'd read a year ago and 2 years ago. I made it to February 22nd, and then I stopped. But what happened next was the thing that surprised me. I had learned to love, to crave that time of the morning. This time reading about and studying God and things spiritual. I developed this craving for those moments of quiet, reflective thought, powered by a fairly strong cup of coffee. It was my way to start the day now. My new habit was deeply seated. And the immediate challenge was, what am I going to read now? I thought I had my reading all figured out for the next year. I had stopped reading so quickly, I didn't really have a backup. So I went online and looked up the 100 greatest Christian books and saw a list. And on that list, number 3 was by C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. I had tried to read that book a few years back. That's why I was in the house. And I, interestingly enough, couldn't get into it. This time, I loved it. The timing of reading this book is written as a compilation of Lewis's series of radio broadcasts during the bombing of Britain in World War II and our own pandemic. I realized we weren't getting bombed, but it seemed like we were getting attacked. Of being quarantined, hunkered down in the basement, sending out reflections from the library, just seemed to make it that much more compelling. And I crave more reading from the greats, from Frederick Buechner to Nouwen to Karl Barth to St. Augustine. St. Augustine, what could somebody from 385 Common Era have to say of interest to me? In his book of Confessions, it spoke directly to me. So, with these books all this time, it's basically been kind of 5 pages a day, sometimes a few more. I figured if I could get through 5 pages of Leviticus, Numbers, Chronicles, I could somehow power through 5 pages a day of anything. Maybe even H. Richard Niebuhr or Paul Tillich. Now, I threw those names in because now this is an official sermon from this pulpit to mention those two gentlemen. In the midst of all this reading, I found a book, not a Christian book, but a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I was fascinated by it because it not only was just identifying how habits work, but also how they can be changed. We live in the midst of a cycle that they referred to as a habit loop. You have this thing that happens to you. That's the cue. You respond to it with a routine to receive something like a reward. The routine is the part we live out. Typically the thing that we would refer to as that's our good habit or a bad habit. according to this book, there is a golden rule of habits. You can't get rid of a bad habit. You can only change it. So now it's high time for a sports analogy. I clipped an article in the Express News about 10 years ago that was a discussion between the sports writer and Spurs coach Greg Popovich. They were discussing a Spurs guard of that time named Brent Barry and his slump in making three-point shots. For the sports-impaired listeners, we're talking about basketball. I must have been in a slump of my own, wandering through some desert for me, A, to have been reading the sports pages, and B, to have actually clipped it out. But I quote, "He has got to really help himself out about not giving a damn about missing shots," Popovich said. "If he concentrates on running the floor, playing D, running the break, filling lanes, everything happens easier offensively for him. If he worries about missing shots, that screws up his game because that is who he is. He's got to get out of that." In short, Popovich said, Barry needed to participate in his own resurrection. That participation is what the Power of Habit book calls creating competing routines. In this case, ditch the focus on worrying about making shots and replace it with bringing on your complete game. Play defense, run the court. You'll find you make more shots. The truth is, the brain can be reprogrammed. You just have to be deliberate about it. And once you recognize the cues and rewards, you're halfway to coming up with the competing routines. And you're changing the habit. In my life, I needed to stop worrying about missing shots. Instead, I need to work on my entire game. Researchers identified some habits called Keystone habits, which, when engaged, unintentionally triggers other habits. If a Keystone habit is disrupted or changed, those other habits change as well. I must have unknowingly stumbled upon a Keystone habit in my life, because here I am, reading classic literature, attempting to tell a joke, reciting scripture, even talking to you now. This really does not come natural for me. I've discovered that as I have doubts, I am in good company. Some very fine minds have struggled over the fine points of their belief of God. My feeling is that as they put their thoughts and beliefs in print, it actually strengthened their own faith. It appears that a big discussion has been whether it is by reason or by revelation that we find God. Karl Barth spoke of the impossible possibility. H. Richard Niebuhr spun something about a doubting faith, that a doubting faith was actually a reasoning faith. Perhaps that was his revelation. I think we all have a little more room for a little more resurrection. We just need to participate. But a word of caution, it can become habit forming. Amen.